In a quiet, unassuming town nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, life moved at a slow, predictable pace. Crime was rare, and the people trusted their local law enforcement to keep them safe. Among the officers who patrolled the streets, Detective Mark Reynolds stood out as one of the most respected figures in the community. With his sharp instincts, tireless dedication, and years of experience, he had earned a reputation as a man who could solve even the toughest cases. To the residents, Mark was a hero, a symbol of justice and integrity. But behind closed doors, Mark carried secrets that no one suspected. His outward charm masked a simmering anger, a deep resentment toward those he believed held power over him. Mark's relationship with Prosecutor Evelyn Carter had always been strained. Evelyn was a rising star in the district attorney's office. Known for her meticulous attention to detail and unwavering commitment to fairness, she was not afraid to challenge corruption, even if it meant going against powerful figures within the police department. Her investigations often overlapped with Mark's cases, leading to frequent clashes. Evelyn saw herself as a guardian of justice, while Mark viewed her as an obstacle, a thorn in his side who constantly questioned his methods. Their rivalry reached a boiling point during a high-profile case involving a suspected drug lord. Mark had arrested the suspect after weeks of surveillance, confident that he had gathered enough evidence to secure a conviction. But Evelyn, upon reviewing the case file, discovered irregularities in the way the evidence had been collected. She confronted Mark, accusing him of misconduct and threatening to file formal complaints against him. Mark denied any wrongdoing, but Evelyn refused to back down. The tension between them escalated into bitter animosity, with both refusing to see the other's perspective. While Mark's professional life was unraveling, Evelyn's personal life was thriving. She was married to Daniel Carter, a kind-hearted schoolteacher who adored her deeply. Together, they had 2 young children, Emily, aged 8, and Liam, aged 5. The Carters were the picture-perfect family, living in a cozy house on the outskirts of town. Their home was filled with laughter, warmth, and love. Neighbors often remarked on how lucky Evelyn was to have such a supportive husband and well-behaved children. To the outside world, the Carters seemed like the embodiment of happiness, a beacon of hope in a chaotic world. But Mark saw things differently. In his twisted mind, Evelyn's happiness felt like a slap in the face. He couldn't understand how someone who had caused him so much trouble could have such a fulfilling life. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. His bitterness festered, feeding off his insecurities and frustrations. Over time, his resentment transformed into something darker, a desire for vengeance. Mark began to obsess over the idea of making Evelyn pay for what he perceived as her betrayal. He convinced himself that she didn't deserve the life she had, and he started plotting a way to take it all away from her. One fateful evening, under the cover of darkness, Mark put his plan into motion. He waited until the streets were empty before driving to the Carter household. He knew the layout of the house well, having visited it once during a neighborhood watch meeting. As he approached the front door, his heart pounded with a mix of fear and excitement. He slipped inside quietly, careful not to make a sound. The house was dimly lit, with only the faint glow of a nightlight guiding his way. Upstairs, Daniel was tucking Emily and Liam into bed. The children giggled as he read them a bedtime story, their voices carrying softly through the hallway. Mark listened for a moment, his grip tightening on the weapon he had brought with him. Then, with cold determination, he moved toward them, bedrooms. What happened next was swift and brutal. By the time neighbors heard the commotion and called the police, it was too late. Daniel and the children were found dead, their lives extinguished in an unimaginable act of violence. When news of the massacre reached the precinct, shockwaves rippled through the community. Officers scrambled to piece together clues, but there were no signs of forced entry or robbery. Whoever had committed the crime knew the house intimately. As investigators dug deeper, inconsistencies in Mark's alibi began to surface. A neighbor reported seeing a car resembling his parked nearby around the time of the murders. Surveillance footage from a gas station captured grainy images of a figure matching Mark's description, buying fuel shortly before the crime. Despite these leads proving his guilt would require more than circumstantial evidence, Evelyn, devastated by the loss of her loved ones, became consumed by grief and rage. Yet even amid her anguish, she vowed to uncover the truth. With the help of trusted colleagues, she launched her own investigation, poring over case files, witness statements, and forensic reports. It wasn't long before she stumbled upon something chilling: a deleted email draft on Mark's work computer containing cryptic messages about balancing the scales. This discovery reignited her determination to bring the perpetrator to justice, no matter the cost. As pressure mounted, cracks began to form in Mark's carefully constructed facade. Haunted by guilt and paranoia, he started making mistakes. During questioning, he inadvertently revealed knowledge of details only the killer could know. His erratic behavior at the precinct raised suspicions among his fellow officers, some of whom began to distance themselves from him. Meanwhile, Evelyn worked tirelessly to build a case strong enough to withstand scrutiny in court. The investigation dragged on for months, testing the limits of everyone involved. For Evelyn, each day brought new challenges, but also renewed resolve. She refused to let Mark's actions define her or destroy her spirit. Instead, she channeled her pain into action, determined to ensure that no one else would suffer the way she had. Her quest for justice became a beacon of hope for others who had lost faith in the system, inspiring them to believe that accountability was still possible, even in the face of overwhelming odds. As the pieces of the puzzle slowly came together, the town braced itself for what lay ahead. The once trusted detective now stood accused of unspeakable crimes, shaking the very foundation of trust between the police and the community. Friends turned into strangers, and whispers of doubt filled the air. For Evelyn, the journey was far from over. She knew that bringing Mark to justice would be just the beginning of a long and difficult road to healing, but she also knew that giving up was not an option, not when so much was at stake. And so the stage was set for a dramatic showdown, where truth would confront lies, and justice would demand its due. The town held its breath, waiting to see whether good could triumph over evil, or whether the scars left behind would linger forever. The days following the brutal murders of Daniel Carter and his children were a blur of grief, confusion, and mounting suspicion. The once peaceful town was gripped by fear, its residents struggling to make sense of the unimaginable violence that had shattered their sense of safety. For Evelyn Carter, the pain was unbearable. Her world had been torn apart in an instant, leaving her adrift in a sea of despair. Yet, amidst the chaos, a flicker of determination began to burn within her. She refused to let the tragedy consume her completely. Instead, she vowed to uncover the truth, no matter how painful or dangerous the journey might be. Detective Mark Reynolds, on the other hand, appeared outwardly calm as investigators closed in. He maintained his composure during questioning, offering carefully rehearsed answers to deflect suspicion. But inside he was unraveling. The weight of what he had done pressed down on him like a crushing force, haunting his every thought. At night he lay awake, replaying the horrific events over and over in his mind. The faces of Daniel, Emily, and Liam haunted his dreams, their eyes accusing, their voices pleading for justice. Despite his best efforts to suppress his guilt, it seeped into his actions, manifesting in subtle but telling ways. Mark's behavior at the precinct became increasingly erratic. Once known for his sharp focus and unwavering professionalism, he now seemed distracted and irritable. He snapped at colleagues over minor issues and avoided eye contact during meetings. His fellow officers noticed the change, exchanging worried glances behind his back. Some began to distance themselves from him, sensing that something wasn't right. Others whispered among themselves, speculating about whether Mark could truly be involved in such a heinous crime. After all, he had spent years building a reputation as one of the most trusted detectives in the department. How could someone so respected commit such an act? Meanwhile, Evelyn threw herself into the investigation with relentless energy. Her grief fueled her determination, driving her to dig deeper than anyone else dared. She spent long hours poring over case files, analyzing every detail with laser-like precision. Her colleagues marveled at her ability to stay focused despite the emotional toll the case was taking on her. They offered words of support, urging her to take breaks and prioritize her well-being. But Evelyn couldn't stop, not until she found answers. One breakthrough came when Evelyn discovered a deleted email draft on Mark's work computer. The message, though vague, contained chilling references to balancing the scales and teaching them a lesson. It was enough to raise serious questions about Mark's involvement in the murders. Evelyn immediately flagged the discovery, ensuring that forensic experts examined the evidence thoroughly. Their findings confirmed that the email had originated from Mark's account, further implicating him in the investigation. As more pieces of the puzzle fell into place, the pressure on Mark intensified. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed a man resembling him purchasing fuel shortly before the murders. A neighbor also reported seeing a car similar to Mark's parked near the Carter home around the same time. These leads, combined with the incriminating email, painted a damning picture. Still, Mark clung to his innocence, insisting that he was being framed. He claimed that someone must have hacked into his computer and planted the email to discredit him. But his explanations sounded hollow, lacking credibility even to his own ears. Evelyn, however, wasn't swayed by Mark's denials. She knew him too well. His arrogance, his thirst for control, his inability to accept accountability. To her, the evidence spoke louder than any excuse he could offer. With each new revelation, her resolve hardened. She realized that bringing Mark to justice wouldn't just be about avenging her family. It would also be about exposing the flaws in a system that allowed individuals like him to operate unchecked. This realization gave her strength, pushing her forward even when the odds felt insurmountable. The tension between Evelyn and Mark reached a boiling point during a heated confrontation at the precinct. Evelyn confronted him directly, demanding to know why his alibi didn't add up and why evidence kept pointing in his direction. Mark, caught off guard, struggled to maintain his composure. His voice trembled as he tried to defend himself, but his attempts only made him appear more guilty. In a moment of unguarded emotion, he blurted out details about the crime scene that only the killer could have known. Realizing his mistake, he quickly backtracked, but the damage was done. Evelyn stared at him, her expression a mixture of shock and anger. For the first time, she saw the true depths of his depravity. Word of the confrontation spread quickly through the precinct, sparking intense debates among the officers. Some still believed in Mark's innocence, clinging to the hope that there was a reasonable explanation for the mounting evidence against him. Others, however, began to question everything they thought they knew about him. The divide grew wider, with each passing day, creating an atmosphere of unease and mistrust. Even those who wanted to believe in Mark's innocence couldn't ignore the growing pile of evidence stacked against him. Outside the precinct, the community grappled with its own conflicting emotions. Many residents struggled to reconcile the image of Mark as a dedicated detective with the allegations against him. How could someone they had trusted implicitly be capable of such brutality? The question lingered in the air, unanswered and unsettling. Meanwhile, others rallied around Evelyn, offering their support and vowing to stand by her side throughout the ordeal. They admired her courage and resilience, seeing her as a symbol of hope in a dark time. As the investigation progressed, media coverage of the case exploded. Reporters descended on the small town, eager to uncover the truth behind the shocking murders. Headlines screamed accusations, while talk shows debated the merits of the evidence against Mark. The constant scrutiny took a toll on everyone involved, particularly Evelyn. She found herself thrust into the spotlight, forced to relive her trauma over and over again as cameras captured her every move. Despite the attention, she remained steadfast, using the platform to demand justice not just for her family, but for all victims of violent crime. Behind the scenes, forensic teams worked tirelessly to piece together the final pieces of the puzzle. Ballistics tests confirmed that bullets recovered from the crime scene matched Mark's service weapon, a damning connection that left little room for doubt. DNA analysis placed him at the Carter home on the night of the murders, further solidifying the case against him. Each new discovery brought Evelyn closer to the closure she desperately sought, but it also deepened the anguish of knowing that someone she had once trusted had betrayed her in the worst possible way. In the midst of the chaos, Mark's mental state continued to deteriorate. The walls were closing in and he knew it. Desperation drove him to take drastic measures, including destroying potential evidence and attempting to intimidate witnesses. But his efforts only dug him deeper into trouble, drawing additional scrutiny from investigators. One officer, who had initially defended Mark, finally turned against him after discovering inconsistencies in his story. The betrayal cut deeply, leaving Mark feeling isolated and cornered. For Evelyn, the turning point came when she received a call from the lead detective overseeing the case. He informed her that they had gathered enough evidence to formally charge Mark with the murders of Daniel, Emily, and Liam. Hearing those words brought a mix of relief and sorrow. Relief because she finally had confirmation that justice was within reach, and sorrow because nothing could ever bring her family back. As she hung up the phone, tears streamed down her face. She allowed herself a moment of vulnerability, letting the full weight of her loss wash over her. Then, steeling herself for the battles ahead, she wiped her eyes and stood up straight. There was still work to be done. With charges filed, the next step was preparing for trial. Prosecutors worked closely with Evelyn to build a compelling case, ensuring that every piece of evidence was presented clearly and convincingly. Defense attorneys scrambled to counter the overwhelming proof against Mark, resorting to desperate tactics in an attempt to cast doubt on the prosecution's narrative. They argued that Mark was being scapegoated, pointing fingers at other potential suspects and questioning the integrity of the investigation. But their efforts fell flat in the face of the mountain of evidence arrayed against him. As the trial date approached, the town braced itself for what promised to be a landmark, legal battle. Friends and neighbors gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs and candles in memory of Daniel, Emily, and Liam. Inside, tensions ran high as lawyers delivered opening statements, setting the stage for a dramatic courtroom showdown. For Evelyn, the trial represented both a reckoning and a chance to reclaim her life. She sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes fixed firmly on Mark. Though the road ahead would be long and painful, she knew that she was ready to face whatever came next. And so the second chapter of this harrowing tale unfolded, a chapter marked by perseverance, betrayal, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. The stakes were higher than ever, and the outcome hung precariously in the balance. Would the truth prevail, or would darkness triumph over light? Only time would tell. The courtroom was packed to capacity on the first day of the trial, with reporters, spectators, and family members filling every available seat. The air buzzed with anticipation as everyone waited for the proceedings to begin. For Evelyn Carter, this moment had been months in the making, a culmination of sleepless nights, endless investigations, and relentless determination. She sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly together, her face a mask of composure despite the storm raging inside her. Across the room, Detective Mark Reynolds sat beside his defense team, his expression unreadable, but tinged with defiance. This was the stage where truth would confront lies and justice would demand its due. The prosecution opened the case with a powerful statement that set the tone for the trial. The lead prosecutor stood before the jury, painting a vivid picture of the tragedy that had unfolded on that fateful night. He recounted the horrifying details of the murders, the brutality of the attack, the innocence of the victims, and the devastating impact on Evelyn and the community. His words were deliberate and measured, designed to evoke both outrage and empathy. He emphasized that this wasn't just a case about one man's actions. It was about accountability, integrity, and ensuring that such atrocities never happened again. When it came time for Evelyn to take the stand, the room fell silent. All eyes were on her as she walked to the witness box, her steps steady but heavy with emotion. Her testimony was raw and unfiltered, a heart-wrenching account of the life she had lost. She spoke of Daniel's kindness, Emily's laughter, and Liam's curiosity, moments frozen in time, now forever out of reach. Her voice trembled as she described finding their bodies, the sight etched into her memory like a scar that would never fade. But even in her grief, there was an undeniable strength. She refused to let Mark's actions define her or diminish her resolve. Instead, she channeled her pain into purpose, imploring the jury to see beyond his badge and recognize the monster beneath. Mark's defense team fought back fiercely, attempting to discredit Evelyn's testimony and cast doubt on the prosecution's case. They argued that her grief clouded her judgment, making her incapable of objectivity. They suggested that she was targeting Mark out of revenge, fueled by their contentious professional rivalry. Their cross-examination was aggressive, probing every detail of her statements in search of inconsistencies. At times, they succeeded in rattling her, forcing her to pause and collect herself before answering. But Evelyn remained steadfast, meeting their challenges head-on with clarity and conviction. By the time she stepped down from the stand, there was no denying the depth of her loss or her unwavering commitment to justice. As the trial progressed, the prosecution presented a wealth of evidence linking Mark to the crime scene. Forensic experts testified about the ballistics tests that confirmed the bullets recovered from the victims matched Mark's service weapon. DNA specialists explained how samples collected at the house placed him at the scene on the night of the murders. Investigators detailed the surveillance footage showing a car resembling his parked near the Carter home and the gas station receipt placing him in the area around the same time. Each piece of evidence added another brick to the wall of proof against him, leaving little room for reasonable doubt. But perhaps the most damning revelation came when the prosecution introduced the deleted email draft found on Mark's work computer. A digital forensics expert took the stand, explaining how the message contained chilling references to balancing the scales and teaching them a lesson. He confirmed that the email originated from Mark's account and had been deliberately erased, an act that only strengthened the prosecution's argument. When asked about the email during cross-examination, Mark stammered and stumbled over his responses, unable to provide a plausible explanation. His discomfort was palpable, further eroding any remaining credibility he might have had. Defense attorneys worked tirelessly to counter the prosecution's narrative, employing a variety of tactics to create doubt. They questioned the reliability of the forensic evidence, suggesting that it could have been tampered with or misinterpreted. They highlighted minor discrepancies in witness testimonies, arguing that these inconsistencies undermined the prosecution's case. They even floated alternative theories, pointing fingers at other potential suspects and accusing investigators of tunnel vision. At one point, they called a character witness who attested to Mark's dedication as a police officer, urging the jury to consider the possibility that he was being framed, but their efforts felt desperate, grasping at straws in the face of overwhelming evidence. Throughout the trial, Mark's demeanor shifted between defiance and resignation. On some days, he appeared confident, leaning back in his chair and exchanging whispers with his lawyers. On others, he seemed defeated, avoiding eye contact and staring blankly at the floor. The weight of the accusations and the mounting evidence against him was taking its toll. Even his own colleagues, once staunch defenders of his innocence, began to distance themselves. Some testified reluctantly, acknowledging the irregularities in his behavior leading up to the murders. Others simply avoided the courthouse altogether, unwilling to bear witness to the unraveling of a man they had once admired. For Evelyn, the trial was an emotional roller coaster. There were moments of triumph, when key pieces of evidence reinforced her case and brought her closer to closure. But there were also moments of despair, when defense attorneys' attacks hit too close to home, reopening wounds she thought had begun to heal. Friends and supporters surrounded her, offering comfort and encouragement whenever she needed it. Yet, she carried much of the burden alone, knowing that the outcome of the trial rested heavily on her shoulders. She often found herself replaying the events in her mind, wondering if there was anything she could have done differently to prevent the tragedy, but she quickly reminded herself that the blame lay solely with Mark, not with her. The courtroom drama reached its peak during closing arguments, when both sides delivered impassioned speeches aimed at swaying the jury's verdict. The prosecution painted Mark as a man consumed by hatred and revenge, whose unchecked anger had led him to commit unspeakable acts. They urged the jury to look beyond his uniform and see him for what he truly was, a predator hiding in plain sight. They reminded the jurors of their duty to uphold justice, not just for Evelyn and her family, but for the entire community. Their words resonated deeply, striking a chord with those tasked with deciding Mark's fate. The defense, meanwhile, clung to the faint hope of securing an acquittal. Their closing argument focused on casting doubt, questioning the integrity of the investigation and accusing the prosecution of bias. They implored the jury to consider the possibility of reasonable doubt, emphasizing that convicting an innocent man would be a grave injustice. But their pleas rang hollow in the face of the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution. As the final arguments concluded, the judge instructed the jury to deliberate carefully, reminding them of the gravity of their decision. For Evelyn, the wait was excruciating. She spent hours pacing outside the courtroom, her mind racing with thoughts of what the verdict might mean. Would justice finally be served, or would Mark walk free, leaving her family's deaths unresolved? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but she refused to give in to despair. Instead, she focused on the progress she had made, drawing strength from the knowledge that she had fought tirelessly for the truth. Finally, after days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. The courtroom erupted in tense silence as the foreperson stood to deliver the decision. When the word guilty echoed through the room, relief washed over Evelyn like a tidal wave. Tears streamed down her face as she hugged her friends and supporters, overwhelmed by the realization that justice had prevailed. Across the room, Mark sat motionless, his face pale and expressionless. The verdict marked the end of his reign of terror, but for Evelyn it was only the beginning of a long journey toward healing. In the aftermath of the trial, the town struggled to come to terms with the shocking revelations. Many residents grappled with feelings of betrayal, struggling to reconcile the image of Mark as a trusted detective with the reality of his crimes. Conversations turned to questions about systemic failures within law enforcement and the need for greater accountability. For Evelyn, the trial represented more than just a personal victory. It was a catalyst for change, inspiring others to demand transparency and reform. As the dust settled, Evelyn turned her focus inward, beginning the arduous process of rebuilding her life. She knew that the scars left by Mark's actions would never fully heal, but she also knew that she had the strength to move forward. With the support of her loved ones and the memory of her family guiding her, she vowed to honor their legacy by continuing to fight for justice, for herself, for others, and for a world where such tragedies could never happen again. With the guilty verdict ringing in the courtroom, the focus shifted to sentencing, a phase that would determine the final chapter of Detective Mark Reynolds's fall from grace. The town, still reeling from the shock of his crimes, awaited the judge's decision with bated breath. For Evelyn Carter, this was the moment she had been waiting for, not just a chance to see justice served, but also an opportunity to confront Mark one last time. She prepared herself emotionally, knowing that nothing could undo the pain he had caused, but hoping that the sentence would bring some semblance of closure. The sentencing hearing took place in the same courtroom where the trial had unfolded, its walls now heavy with the weight of what had transpired. Friends, family members, and survivors filled the benches, their faces etched with a mix of grief and anticipation. Many held candles or wore ribbons in memory of Daniel, Emily, and Liam, turning the somber space into a tribute to the lives lost. Outside, a small crowd gathered holding signs that read, "Justice for the Carters and no more corruption." The atmosphere was tense yet united, a testament to the community's shared desire for accountability. Before the judge delivered the sentence, victims' families were given the opportunity to speak. One by one, they approached the podium, their voices trembling with emotion as they recounted the impact of Mark's actions on their lives. A neighbor described how the once peaceful streets now felt unsafe, haunted by the knowledge that such violence could happen so close to home. A colleague of Daniel's spoke about the void left in their school community, where students missed having him as a teacher and role model. Each story painted a vivid picture of the ripple effects of Mark's crimes, underscoring the far-reaching consequences of his choices. When it was Evelyn's turn to address the court, the room fell silent. She stood slowly, her hands gripping the edges of the podium for support. Her voice was steady, though it carried the weight of unspeakable loss. She began by describing the life she had built with Daniel and their children, the laughter-filled evenings, the quiet moments of connection, the dreams they had shared for the future. Then her tone shifted, becoming sharper, more resolute. She spoke directly to Mark, who sat stoically at the defense table, refusing to meet her gaze. "You took everything from me," she said, her words cutting through the silence like a knife. "You didn't just kill my husband and my children. You destroyed our home, our happiness, and our future. But most of all, you betrayed the trust people placed in you as a police officer. You used your position to commit evil instead of protecting us from it." Her voice cracked slightly as she continued. "I want you to know that I will not let your actions define me. I will honor my family by fighting for justice, not just for them, but for everyone who has suffered because of corruption and abuse, of power." Her statement drew tears from many in the audience, including some of the jurors who had convicted Mark. It was a powerful reminder of the human cost of his crimes, leaving no doubt about the gravity of what he had done. When Evelyn finished speaking, the room erupted in applause, a rare display of solidarity in a setting usually marked by decorum. Even the judge nodded solemnly, acknowledging the courage it had taken for her to share her story. Finally, it was time for the judge to deliver the sentence. He reviewed the evidence presented during the trial, emphasizing the premeditated nature of Mark's crimes and the devastating impact they had on the victims' families. He noted that Mark's position as a law enforcement officer made his betrayal particularly egregious, violating the public trust in ways that warranted severe punishment. After a long pause, he announced the decision. Mark Reynolds would be sentenced to death by lethal injection. The courtroom reacted with a mixture of gasps, murmurs, and nods of approval. Some clapped quietly, while others bowed their heads in reflection. For Evelyn, the news brought a flood of emotions, relief, validation, and sorrow all rolled into one. She wasn't naive enough to think that Mark's execution would erase her pain or bring her family back, but it did offer a sense of finality. Knowing that he would never harm anyone again gave her a sliver of peace, however fragile it might be. As the hearing concluded, Mark was escorted out of the courtroom, his expression blank. He showed no remorse, no acknowledgement of the devastation he had caused. This lack of contrition only reinforced the perception that he viewed himself above accountability, even in defeat. His lawyers vowed to appeal the decision, citing procedural errors and questioning the fairness of the trial. But few believed their efforts would succeed, given the overwhelming evidence against him. Mark's fate seemed sealed, destined to spend his remaining days awaiting execution on death row. In the weeks following the sentencing, the town began the slow process of healing. Memorials sprung up around the community, honoring Daniel, Emily, and Liam, and celebrating the values they represented: love, kindness, and resilience. A local artist created a mural depicting the family, its vibrant colors standing in stark contrast to the darkness of their deaths. Schools organized programs to teach students about integrity and civic responsibility, inspired by Daniel's legacy as an educator. And Evelyn, though still grieving deeply, found solace in these acts of remembrance, seeing them as proof that her family's light had not been extinguished. Evelyn decided to step away from her role as a prosecutor, unable to return to the environment where so much of her trauma had unfolded. Instead, she channeled her energy into advocacy work, partnering with organizations dedicated to reforming law enforcement and addressing systemic issues within the justice system. She traveled across the country, sharing her story at conferences and workshops, urging others to demand accountability and transparency. Her message resonated with audiences, inspiring countless individuals to take action in their own communities. Mark's presence loomed large even in his absence. Rumors circulated about his life on death row, with some claiming he spent his days writing letters while others speculated that he remained isolated and unrepentant. The contents of these alleged letters remained unknown, adding an air of mystery to his final chapter. Meanwhile, debates about capital punishment continued to rage, with opinions divided on whether executing Mark would truly serve justice or perpetuate a cycle of violence. For Evelyn, the answer was clear. The sentence wasn't about revenge, it was about ensuring that he could never hurt anyone else. On the day of Mark's execution, a somber crowd gathered outside the prison, holding candles in memory of the innocent lives he had taken. Inside, the procedure unfolded methodically, with officials carrying out their duties with clinical precision. As the lethal injection was administered, Mark's breathing slowed until it stopped altogether. Moments later, the warden announced the time of death, marking the end of a man whose name had become synonymous with betrayal and brutality. For those who had followed the case, it was a moment of reckoning, a reminder that even those entrusted with upholding justice could fall prey to corruption if left unchecked. In the aftermath of Mark's death, the town reflected on the lessons learned from the tragedy. Conversations turned to the importance of oversight, accountability, and ethical leadership within law enforcement. Residents pushed for reforms, advocating for stricter regulations and better training to prevent similar incidents in the future. While scars remained, there was also a renewed sense of hope, a belief that change was possible if people worked together toward a common goal. For Evelyn, the journey was far from over. Though Mark was gone, the memories of her family lingered, guiding her every step forward. She found comfort in their legacy, drawing strength from the love they had shared and the impact they had made on the world. In time, she began to rebuild her life, finding joy in small moments and purpose in her advocacy work. She knew that the road ahead would be long and challenging, but she also knew that she wasn't walking it alone. With the support of her loved ones and the memory of her family lighting the way, she vowed to keep fighting, for justice, for healing, and for a brighter future. And so, the fourth chapter of this harrowing tale came to a close, leaving behind a complex tapestry of grief, resilience, and redemption. It was a story that reminded everyone involved, and those who bore witness to it, that justice, though imperfect, was worth pursuing. It was a story that underscored the enduring power of love and the indomitable human spirit, even in the face of unimaginable loss. Months after Mark Reynolds' execution, the town began to breathe a little easier. The shadow of fear that had loomed over its streets slowly lifted, replaced by a cautious optimism. Life moved forward, but the scars left behind by the tragedy remained visible in the hearts of those who had lost loved ones, in the reforms taking shape within the police department, and in the collective memory of a community forever changed. For Evelyn Carter, the journey toward healing was ongoing, marked by moments of reflection, resilience, and renewed purpose. Evelyn's advocacy work became her lifeline, giving her a sense of direction amid the chaos of grief. She traveled across the country, speaking at conferences, workshops, and community events about the importance of accountability and transparency in law enforcement. Her speeches were raw and honest, drawing from her personal experiences to highlight systemic flaws that allowed individuals like Mark to exploit their positions of power. She didn't shy away from sharing the painful details of her loss, knowing that her story could inspire others to demand change. Justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoing, she often said. It's about creating systems that prevent harm in the first place. Her message resonated deeply with audiences, sparking meaningful conversations about reform. Lawmakers took notice, introducing legislation aimed at increasing oversight of police departments and implementing stricter protocols for handling misconduct allegations. Training programs were revamped to emphasize ethics, empathy, and de-escalation techniques. Community policing initiatives gained traction, fostering stronger relationships between officers and the people they served. While progress was slow, it was steady, a testament to Evelyn's unwavering determination to turn tragedy into transformation. Back in her hometown, Evelyn found solace in small acts of remembrance. She visited the memorial mural dedicated to Ryu, Daniel, Emily, and Liam whenever she needed a moment of connection. The vibrant images of her family brought tears to her eyes, but they also filled her with gratitude for the time they had shared and the love that continued to sustain her. On weekends, she volunteered at local schools, mentoring students and encouraging them to pursue their dreams. She saw glimpses of Daniel in the teachers she worked with and flashes of Emily and Liam in the curious faces of the children. Their memories lived on in the lives they touched, a legacy of kindness and hope. The town itself underwent subtle changes as well. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves began reaching out, forming bonds strengthened by shared adversity. Candlelight vigils turned into annual traditions, uniting residents in remembrance and solidarity. A scholarship fund was established in Daniel's name, providing financial support to aspiring educators. Parks and libraries hosted storytelling sessions where families could share tales of resilience and recovery. These efforts transformed the narrative of the tragedy, shifting the focus from loss to renewal. As time passed, Evelyn started to rebuild her personal life. It wasn't easy. Some days felt heavier than others, and there were still nights when sleep eluded her. But she learned to embrace the good moments, the warmth of a sunrise, the laughter of friends, the quiet comfort of a book. She reconnected with old hobbies, rediscovering the joy of painting and gardening. She even adopted a rescue dog named Max, whose playful antics brought lightness to her days. Slowly but surely, she carved out a new rhythm for herself, one that honored her past while making space for the future. One of the most profound shifts came when Evelyn decided to write a memoir. For years, she had resisted the idea, fearing that putting pen to paper would reopen wounds she had worked so hard to heal. But as she reflected on her journey, she realized how much her story might help others navigating similar pain. She poured her heart into the project, recounting not only the horrors of losing her family, but also the lessons she had learned along the way about courage, forgiveness, and finding meaning in suffering. When the book was finally published, it became an instant bestseller, touching readers around the world with its honesty and humanity. Through her writing, Evelyn connected with others who had endured unimaginable losses. They exchanged letters sharing stories of survival and strength. Some reached out to thank her for giving voice to their own struggles. Others sought advice on how to cope with grief. Evelyn responded to each message personally, offering words of encouragement and reminding them that they weren't alone. These connections deepened her understanding of resilience, showing her that healing was rarely linear but always possible. Despite the progress she made, Evelyn never forgot the cost of Mark's crimes. His absence from the world did little to erase the damage he had caused. Families like hers would carry the weight of his actions for generations. Yet, she refused to let bitterness consume her. Instead, she chose to focus on what she could control: how she treated others, how she contributed to her community, and how she honored her family's memory. In doing so, she embodied the very qualities Daniel, Emily, and Liam had cherished most: compassion, integrity, and love. Mark's death row correspondence, rumored to exist but never publicly released, eventually surfaced years later. The letters revealed fragments of regret, though whether genuine or calculated remained unclear. In one note, he wrote cryptically about the scales tipping too far, suggesting a fleeting acknowledgement of the consequences of his actions. But for Evelyn, these words held little significance. What mattered was not his remorse or lack thereof, but the impact his choices had on countless lives. If anything, the letter served as a reminder of why vigilance against corruption was essential. The final chapter of this story belongs not to Mark, but to those who survived him: the victims' families, the advocates, and the everyday citizens who refused to let his actions define their community. Under Evelyn's leadership, grassroots movements flourished, pushing for lasting reforms that extended beyond law enforcement. Schools introduced anti-bullying programs, workplaces implemented whistleblower protections, and neighborhoods formed safety networks. Each initiative represented a step toward a more just and equitable society, built on trust and mutual respect. Years down the line, Evelyn stood before a crowd gathered at the unveiling of a permanent memorial honoring victims of violent crime. As she gazed at the names etched in stone, including Daniel's, Emily's, and Liam's, she felt a profound sense of peace. This monument wasn't just a tribute to the past, it was a promise to the future, a promise that their stories would continue to inspire action, that their sacrifices would pave the way for change, and that their love would endure through the generations. In her closing remarks, Evelyn spoke directly to the audience, her voice steady and clear. "We cannot undo what has been done," she said, "but we can choose how we respond. We can choose to honor those we've lost by building a world where such tragedies are less likely to happen again. Let us remember not just their deaths but their lives, the joy they brought, the values they upheld, and the dreams they inspired. And let us carry those lessons forward, together." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the park where the memorial now stood. People lingered afterward, hugging, crying, and vowing to keep fighting for justice. Evelyn stayed until the last candle was extinguished, feeling a quiet satisfaction settle over her. The road ahead would still have challenges, but she knew she and the community she loved were ready to face them. And so, the story of vengeful justice came full circle, leaving behind a legacy of resilience and hope. It was a tale of unimaginable loss, yes, but also of extraordinary courage, of a woman who refused to be defined by tragedy and instead chose to rise above it, of a town that came together to heal and transform itself, and of a reminder that, even in the darkest moments, light can prevail if we have the will to seek it.